The evening air was heavy with the smell of fresh rain, the kind that leaves a cool shimmer over every rooftop and sidewalk. Mark Riley stepped out onto the porch, a mug of coffee warming his hands, and breathed in the stillness. He always liked this time of day, the quiet, the fading light, the moment where everything seemed to pause before night fully settled. Out here, in this peaceful suburban cul-de-sac, you'd never guess that a storm was building, not the kind in the sky, the kind that wore a clipboard, a pinched smile, and an HOA badge. The neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, soft golden squares glowing behind windows. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked once, and then quieted. It was calm, deceptively calm. Mark leaned against the rail, sipping his coffee, but his military-trained senses were already alert. His instincts were rarely wrong. They whispered to him that someone was coming, someone annoying, and sure enough, he spotted a familiar figure power walking down the sidewalk with stiff, determined steps. Brenda Whitlock, the HOA president, the self-appointed sheriff of the community. Every time Mark saw her, he wondered how someone so small could carry so much hostility inside her. She wore her usual uniform, black blazer, black pants, clipboard, and a face twisted into an expression like the world owed her an apology for existing. Mark muttered under his breath, "Here we go." Brenda spotted him, and her face lit up not with friendliness, but with the thrill of finding prey. "Mr. Riley," she said sharply, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. "I need to discuss a pressing issue with you." Mark didn't move. "Of course you do." She clicked her pen, ready for battle. "Your fence?" He blinked. "My fence? The same fence that's been here for months? The one you approved? It is now in violation." "How?" he asked, genuinely baffled. Brenda held up a laminated sheet like it was evidence in a courtroom. "Because it is visually aggressive." Mark stared at her. He wasn't sure if she expected him to laugh, cry, or salute. "Visually aggressive?" he repeated slowly. "Brenda, it's a fence. It doesn't even move. It looms," she said dramatically, as if she were talking about a wild animal. "It creates a hostile environment." Mark was about to respond when the screen door squeaked open behind him. His mom stepped outside, holding a bowl of soup and wrapped in a soft shawl. Her eyes narrowed when she recognized Brenda. "Oh no," she muttered, "not tonight." Brenda straightened. "Mrs. Riley, good evening. I'm here about the hostile fencing." "Hostile fencing," his mom repeated. "Brenda, it's wood. It doesn't talk back." Brenda ignored the sarcasm. "It has been repainted in a non-compliant tone," Mark repeated. "It's brown." "The wrong brown," Brenda said. "A threatening brown." His mom laughed out loud, unable to help it. "What is a threatening brown?" "Exactly. The kind that casts a domineering shadow," Brenda said. Mark rubbed his forehead. "Are you listening to yourself?" Brenda opened her mouth to reply, but something else caught Mark's attention. A pair of headlights crept down the street, slow and purposeful, like a patrol car surveying an area. The vehicle moved with a strange, almost exaggerated caution. When the car stopped, Mark froze. It wasn't a normal police cruiser. It looked like a wannabe police car, black and white paint, a cheap light bar on top, and the letters HSEO stenciled on the side. "What the hell is that?" Mark whispered. Brenda perked up. "Ah, perfect timing. Our new HOA safety enforcement officers." HOA, fake cops. Mark nearly choked on his own breath. "Brenda, that's insane." Two men stepped out of the car. They wore black uniforms, boots, belts, radios, and badges that were clearly ordered online. Their faces were half serious, half eager, like they'd been waiting their whole lives for someone to treat them like authority figures. One of them shone a flashlight directly at the fence. "Clear sight obstruction," he announced. Even though nothing was obstructed, the second guy nodded. "Possible hazard documenting." They both walked onto the property without permission. Mark's muscles tensed instantly. Trespassing. On private property. In fake uniforms. His voice dropped dangerously low. "Hey, off the property." The first officer turned. "Sir, step back. HOA regulation inspection in progress." "Not without a warrant," Mark snapped. His mom stepped forward, fear rising. "Get off our yard." The men didn't move. They had the confidence that comes from someone who has never faced real danger. Mark stepped off the porch and walked straight toward them, shoulders squared, eyes cold. The officers hesitated. Something about the way he moved told them he was not a man they wanted to test. "You have 5 seconds," Mark said calmly, "to get off this property." Brenda marched between them. "Stop intimidating my officers." "They're trespassing," Mark said sharply. "They're doing their job," she argued. "They're not police," he fired back. "And they're not stepping one more inch onto this yard." One of the fake officers tried to reach for his radio. Mark's mother's voice cracked. "Please, please just leave." That was the moment Mark lost his patience. He stepped forward so quickly, the officers flinched. "I don't care who sent you," he growled, "but you do not step onto my mother's property at night, ever." The officers exchanged a look, one that said, "We are in way over our heads." They backed up, slowly at first, then quicker. Brenda shouted at them to stay, but they ignored her and retreated to the car. They drove off with their cheap lights flickering. Brenda stood alone, fuming. "You will regret this," she hissed. "I'll be filing a formal complaint. You threatened an HOA safety team." Mark pointed at her clipboard. And I'll be filing a complaint for trespassing and harassment. You don't scare me, she said. Mark leaned forward just slightly, voice low and level. You should be scared of karma. Brenda's jaw tightened. She spun on her heel and stormed off down the street, muttering angrily into her phone. Mark watched her go, breathing hard, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. His mother stepped up beside him. Mark, what is happening to this neighborhood? He exhaled. HOA dictatorship. His mom sighed heavily. This can't go on. Mark placed a hand over hers. It won't, I promise you. She looked at him, the worry softening, replaced by trust. Inside, Mark felt something shift. A resolve, a fire. A clear, sharp determination he hadn't felt in a long time, not since his deployment days, when action meant survival. This wasn't just an annoyance anymore. It was a battle, and Brenda had pushed too far. Later that night, while the house slept, Mark sat at the dining table with the dim lamp glowing over stacks of paper. HOA bylaws, amendments, regulations, every document he could find from the neighborhood portal. Downloaded and printed. He read through them one by one, marking contradictions, highlighting loopholes, searching for the exact leverage he needed. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Outside, the wind stirred leaves against the fence Brenda hated so much. Mark didn't stop reading. He traced his finger down a paragraph, his eyes narrowing with interest. Section 14, Article 12, it mentioned transparency, requirements for HOA leadership, financial disclosures, personal property declarations, annual reports to prevent conflicts of interest. He checked the digital archives. There were no reports from Brenda. Not one. Not a single filed document from the day she became president. Mark leaned back slowly, letting the realization settle in. It was a violation. A major violation. The kind that could remove her from power. A slow smile crept onto his face. So Brenda wanted war. Fine. He would win it. Using her own rulebook, he closed the binder, took a deep breath, and whispered into the quiet room, "You messed with the wrong son." And with that, the war officially began. Morning broke over the neighborhood with a pale silvery light that made everything look quieter than it really was. Birds chirped weakly from the rooftops, dew clung to the lawns, and a thin layer of mist hovered over the street like the world was trying to hide from what came next. But Mark woke long before that calm settled in. He wasn't the type to sleep deeply, not after confrontations, and definitely not after threats from an HOA president, who acted more like a dictator. He swung his legs out of bed and stretched his shoulders, the sharp pull of old muscle injuries reminding him that while he was home now, he had lived years preparing for conflict. He washed up, dressed, and moved with the controlled quiet of someone trained to operate in chaos. Before even stepping outside, he performed his own internal scan, breathing steady, focus, sharp, mind already analyzing the next move. When he stepped into the yard, the morning air hit him with a crisp breath that felt oddly refreshing. His fence stood tall and silent, just like it always had, strong straight lines. Clean wood, solid craftsmanship. Nothing about it was hostile. The sunflowers he and his mother planted were small, barely a few inches of tender green pushing through the soil. They looked harmless, hopeful, fragile. He knelt beside them. "Don't worry," he whispered to the tiny sprouts. "We'll make it through this." He was adjusting the soil when a sudden bright flash exploded in his peripheral vision. A camera. Someone was taking pictures. He rose instantly, posture changing, alertness spiking. A man stood on the sidewalk, a wiry, middle-aged guy with big glasses and a DSLR camera that looked more expensive than the car he drove. He moved with the falsely confident energy of someone who wasn't used to confrontation but enjoyed feeling like he had power. "Excuse me," Mark said sharply. "What are you doing?" The man lowered the camera only an inch. "Documenting violations." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "Violations? Multiple," the man said proudly. "Fence height? Fence tone? Hostile posture?" "Posture," Mark echoed. "The flora," the man continued, ignoring him. "These plants? Very non-compliant." Mark stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The man puffed up. "I'm the HOA compliance photographer." Mark blinked once, twice, then exhaled slowly. "That's not a real job." The man's chin jutted out in offense. It is now. A soft hum of an engine rolled down the street. Mark turned to see a silver sedan approaching. He didn't even need to guess who was inside. The car parked, the door opened, and out stepped Brenda Whitlock, dressed in all black again. Sunglasses perched on her forehead, tablet tucked under her arm, clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon of choice. She walked with a self-important strut that made Mark's shoulders tense automatically. "Good morning, Mr. Riley," Brenda said sweetly, which was the most alarming thing about her. Mark crossed his arms. "Brenda, it's not even 8. What now?" "We have matters to finalize," she said, tapping her clipboard. "I see you're already interacting with our photography department." Mark smirked. "You're what?" "The HOA compliance documentation team," she corrected. Mark eyed the lonely photographer. "So? One guy with a camera, a professional," she insisted. The photographer lifted his camera again, aiming at the fence with obsessive passion. "Get the angle where the shadow looks aggressive," Brenda instructed. Mark stared at the fence's shadow on the ground. It was literally just a shadow. A normal, harmless shadow that doesn't even make sense. He said. Brenda flipped a page and read like an actor preparing for a courtroom scene. We received multiple reports last night regarding your hostile behavior toward authorized HOA safety officers. They trespassed, Mark snapped. At night, with fake badges? They're fully trained, Brenda argued. To do what? He shot back. Annoy people. Brenda ignored that. Your fence is violating the updated color compliance standard. It must be a community-approved neutral shade. It's brown, Mark said. Neutral as it gets. Threatening brown, Brenda corrected. Mark almost laughed. Then the front door opened. His mother stepped out, still in her robe, her hair tied loosely. She looked tired in the way people look when peace is denied to them for too long. What do you want now, Brenda? She asked. Brenda plastered on a smile. Good morning, Mrs. Riley. We're addressing your property's ongoing compliance issues. His mom's jaw clenched. We haven't broken a single rule. Brenda raised her brows as if fascinated by the denial. Oh, but you have. And we will issue an official notice by noon. Mark's breath tensed in his chest. He stepped between them. You're not citing us for sunflowers. I'm citing them for being non-native height, non-approved color, non-standard density, and improperly spaced. His mother nearly laughed from disbelief. They're 3 inches tall. They are already a problem, Brenda said dryly. The photographer snapped several more pictures. Circling the yard like he was photographing a crime scene, Mark felt anger push up through him, not explosive, but controlled, dangerous. The kind that made his voice drop quiet. You're not going to get away with this, he told her. Brenda leaned in slightly. We already have. Her voice was soft, smug, cruel. Mark's mother tugged his sleeve gently. Sweetheart, breathe. He did. But slowly, with effort. After another round of unnecessary photos, Brenda turned away, signaling the photographer to follow. They walked back to the car with the arrogance of people who believe the world bent under their authority. When they finally drove off, Mark stood still for several seconds, grounding himself. His mother stepped beside him and placed her hand on his arm. Mark, she said softly, this is getting worse. I know. I'm scared she won't stop. Mark's eyes hardened. She won't? His mother looked at him, searching for reassurance. What are we going to do? Mark inhaled deeply. The cool morning air filled his lungs, clearing the anger just enough to let something sharper settle in its place. We're going to fight her, he said. How? His mom whispered with her rulebook. His mother blinked, confused. Mark took out his phone. I'm going to study every page of those HOA every sentence, every loophole, every rule she broke without thinking. His mother stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. You're your father's son, she said with a soft, sad smile. Mark swallowed hard. He didn't talk about his father much, but the sunflowers they were for him. His dad loved them, their bright confidence, their stubborn optimism, their way of turning toward the sun even during storms. Mark wasn't sure when he sat down at the table, only that by the time the day matured, he was surrounded by papers. 3 thick binders lay open in front of him. His laptop displayed downloadable PDFs of HOA regulations, amendments, previous presidents' reports, meeting minutes, and archived newsletters. He read them like he was preparing for deployment again, page by page, line by line. Hours passed. The afternoon sun traveled across the wall, then dipped lower until the soft orange glow filled the dining room. Mark didn't stop. He read through guidelines about lawn height, trash bin placement, mailbox color, holiday lighting, even regulations on wind chimes. He skimmed through sections defining acceptable gardening practices, fence types, driveway materials, permissible porch decorations. He read so deeply he became familiar with the phrasing patterns, the contradictions, the sloppy loopholes created by lazy leadership. And then he found it. A single section buried near the end of the Bible. Section 14. Article 12. A clause requiring HOA presidents to file financial disclosures and personal property statements annually. Mandatory, no exceptions. Violations punishable by removal from office. He checked the online archives. No reports from Brenda. Not for this year. Not for last year. Not for last year. Not for the year before that. A slow, deliberate smile spread across Mark's face. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and whispered to himself, knew it. He opened a new note on his phone, titled it, Operation Sunflower, then began typing steps. Collect all evidence of Brenda's non-compliance record, every HOA violation she committed, document harassment, trespassing, and unauthorized patrol presence, interview neighbors who disliked her leadership, file a complaint with the HOA board, submit. Article 12, violation case, remove Brenda, legally. Rebuild community fairness, protect the fence, grow the sunflowers. Anyway, he looked at the list, satisfied. His mother walked into the room holding 2 cups of tea. She placed one beside him and looked at the papers spread everywhere. You found something, she said, sensing the shift. Mark nodded. Oh yeah, something big. Is it enough to stop her? It's enough to take her down. His mom let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Thank God. Mark wrapped his hands around the warm tea mug. He stared at the steam rising from it and felt a calm determination settle deep in his chest. "We're not the ones who should be scared anymore," he said quietly, and somewhere outside, the tiny sunflowers swayed in the evening breeze, as if nodding in agreement. The day after the HOA sent their second warning letter, Mark woke up before sunrise. The sky was still a pale, bruised purple, the kind of quiet dawn where every sound feels louder than usual. He stepped outside with a cup of coffee, expecting peace, but instead, he found tire tracks in the soil right next to his sunflower row. Fresh ones, deep. Someone had pulled right up to the edge of the garden bed, close enough to crush two of the younger plants. He crouched low, fingers brushing the disturbed earth, jaw tightening. Someone wasn't just annoyed about his sunflowers, they were testing him. He rose slowly, scanning the quiet street, but no one was out. The HOA guardhouse light down the block glowed faintly, but the windows were dark. The volunteers had gone off duty hours ago. He took a long breath, forcing himself not to let anger make decisions for him, because whoever did this, they wanted a reaction. They wanted him to snap, and if he did, the HOA would use it against him. Inside the house, his mom noticed the tension as soon as he stepped in. She didn't ask questions, she simply placed her hand on his shoulder. It was the kind of gesture mothers give when they already know something is wrong. He smiled at her, because her strength always felt like an anchor, even if she didn't realize it. He didn't mention the damaged plants. She worried enough already. Instead, he grabbed his gloves and returned outside with quiet determination. For the next 2 days, he reinforced the garden bed. He added gravel edging, repacked the soil, and installed a small drip line system he had been planning for weeks. If someone tried to mess with his sunflowers again, they'd have to go through a real barrier, not just loose soil. But the strangest part, the bigger the sunflowers grew, the more people stopped on the sidewalk to admire them. An older woman walking her dog paused one morning and said, "These are beautiful. Honey, don't let that HOA nonsense get to you." They brightened the whole street. That small moment meant more to him than she knew. He thanked her and watched her walk away as the dog tugged excitedly at the leash. But those small moments of kindness made the HOA's behavior feel even uglier. It wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about rules. It was control. Later that afternoon, a black SUV he recognized all too well rolled slowly down the street. The HOA president, Mr. Landon Kell, was behind the wheel. Landon always drove like he owned the neighborhood, like every inch of concrete belonged to him personally. He slowed even more when he approached Mark's yard, his hard, judgmental eyes sweeping over the towering green stalks. Mark didn't look away. He didn't bow his head. He stood tall in the garden bed, his gloves covered in soil, his shirt damp with sweat from hours of work. The sunlight hit the sunflowers just right at that moment, their gold petals glowing like a wall lit from within. Landon's lips tightened. He rolled down his window. "You've been warned," Landon said, his voice flat and cold. "Remove them before the board takes further action." Mark didn't answer, because the silence itself was an answer, the kind that made Landon's jaw twitch before he drove off. That night, the sunflowers swayed under the moonlight like tall guards keeping watch. Mark sat on the porch steps, feeling that strange mix of exhaustion and adrenaline that comes when you're fighting a battle you didn't choose. He listened to crickets. He watched shadows move across the street, and when a car slowed near the corner, he noticed immediately, but this time, it didn't approach his house. Instead, it parked briefly near the HOA bulletin board, and a figure stepped out, posting something. Mark stayed still, observing. In the morning, he walked to the board, half expecting a new rule tailored specifically against him, but what he found was worse. A printed HOA notice with an image of his house, his sunflowers circled in red like evidence in a crime. The headline read, "Unapproved structural growth, community hazard, structural growth." Hazard. They were sunflowers, not razor wire. Neighbors gathered, whispering. Some shook their heads, unimpressed by the HOA. Others glanced at Mark with sympathy. A few looked uneasy, choosing the safer option of staying silent. By noon, his mother finally saw the flyer. She walked outside with him, staring at the board, her expression turning from confusion to quiet disbelief. "They're flowers," she whispered, "just flowers." But Mark saw something else and her face hurt. This wasn't just about the neighborhood anymore. This was an attack on the peace she had tried so hard to build after years of struggle. After raising him alone through everything life had thrown at them, he knew then that he couldn't just ignore the HOA. Not anymore. They had crossed a line, and they were getting bolder. And if he didn't push back now, they would only escalate. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, a neighbor from 2 houses down approached. A quiet man, always polite, but one who mostly kept to himself. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Mark," he said softly, "you should know. Someone on the board is planning something bigger. I heard them talking. They want to fine you until you remove everything. And if you don't, they think they can force a lien." A lien. On his mother's house. Mark felt the world tilt for a second. His fists tightened. Not from fear. He had felt fear in combat zones far from here. This was something different. Something sharper. The feeling of someone threatening the only person who mattered to him. He thanked the neighbor and stood alone in the fading light. The sunflowers towered behind him, rustling softly as a warm breeze passed through them. They had grown strong, and so had he. Whatever the HOA was planning next, they had no idea the kind of fight they were walking into, because Mark didn't back down, not for anyone, not ever. Mike stood in the dim glow of the porch light long after the neighbors had drifted back to their houses. Long after the last whisper died into the quiet suburban night, the moonlight washed over the sunflower wall, now towering like a golden barricade guarding the property. For the first time in weeks, he felt the air settle calmer, but only on the surface. Something inside him knew Brenda wasn't finished. She never stopped. She never gave up. Power wasn't a rule for her. It was oxygen, and someone like that never walked away quietly. He leaned against the railing, listening to the crickets, thinking about the way she stared at him earlier, those cold, calculating eyes that promised she had one more move loaded in her back pocket. Inside, his wife Emily paced the living room, running her hands through her hair. "You don't think she'll try something tonight, right?" she asked, glancing nervously at the window. Mike shook his head slowly. "Brenda likes making a scene. She won't do anything in the dark. She'll wait until she can get an audience." Emily sighed, sinking into the couch. "I just want this to be over. All of it. The letters, the fines, the complaints. It's exhausting." Mike crossed the room and rubbed her shoulder. "I know, but after tonight, she's cornered. Everyone saw her get shut down. Even her own board members didn't back her up. That's a first." "Maybe," Emily whispered, "but she's spiteful, Mike. People like her don't feel defeated, they feel humiliated, and humiliation turns into something ugly." Mike didn't want to admit it, but she was right. The next morning, just past sunrise, he walked outside with his coffee, only to see a black SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted darker than legal. A man sat inside, staring directly at his house. No movement, no acknowledgement, just watching. Mike froze. This wasn't normal. Not "Hey Shalavel Petty." This was something else. He approached slowly, stopping on the sidewalk. The man didn't react. He wore a suit, a badge clipped to his belt, but not police. Private investigator? Security? Mike took 2 steps closer. "You lost?" he asked loudly. The man rolled the window down exactly 3 inches. "I'm conducting business for the Homeowners Association." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Since when does the HOA hire surveillance?" The man didn't answer. The window rolled back up. The engine stayed off. He just kept staring. Mike walked back toward the house, fists tightening at his sides. Emily appeared at the window the moment she heard the door open. "Who is that? What's happening now?" "He says he's working for the HOA, Mike muttered. "But I've never seen him at a meeting." Emily's face went pale. "This is insane." "She hired someone." Mike didn't reply. He grabbed his keys and headed back outside. If Brenda wanted to escalate, he would face her directly. The Pi watched as Mike got in the truck, but didn't stop him. Driving down the street toward Brenda's house, Mike noticed something odd. 3 HOA board members' cars weren't there. Usually, they met every Sunday morning like clockwork, drinking weak coffee and gossiping about everyone else's lawn length. But today the neighborhood felt different, quieter, off. When he turned onto Brenda's street, his stomach dropped. Brenda's driveway was empty. Her blinds were closed. A notice was taped to her door. Mike got out and walked up the path. The paper flapped lightly in the breeze. It wasn't an HOA letter. It was an official county seal. The words slammed into him like a punch. "Order of temporary removal and psychological evaluation. County Wellness Department, what the hell?" Mike whispered under his breath. Before he could process, a neighbor 2 houses down called out, "They took her last night." Mike turned. It was Mr. Dalton, the retired veteran who spoke rarely but saw everything. "What do you mean?" Mike asked. Mr. Dalton hobbled over, his cane tapping softly. "Sheriff's Department and a crisis team." Brenda was screaming at midnight. Said the neighborhood was collapsing under enemy occupation. Tried to barricade herself inside with a taser. Mike blinked, stunned. She had a taser. Dalton shrugged. "Crazy comes with accessories these days. Is she okay?" Mike asked, though he wasn't sure why he cared. "Hard to say. They said she's being evaluated for 72 hours. Maybe longer." Mike exhaled slowly. That should have given him relief, but something about it felt wrong. This wasn't the victory he expected. This was sad, troubling, and definitely not the end. On the drive back home, he noticed the black SUV was gone. For a brief second, he thought maybe the chaos was finally dissolving. But when he turned onto his street, another car was theirs, leek silver, with county plates. A woman in formal attire stepped out the moment she saw him. "Mr. Reynolds?" she asked, holding a folder. "Yes," he said cautiously. "I'm Officer Harris with the county's Property Compliance Division." Mike raised a brow. "Property compliance? I've been dealing with the HOA, not the county." Harris offered a sympathetic smile. "Yes, and that's why I'm here. We received a report from your association claiming your property poses a safety risk to the community." Mike nearly choked. "A safety risk? It's a fence and sunflowers." She nodded. "I can see that, but once a report is filed, I'm required to conduct an in-person assessment." He gestured toward the backyard. "Then let's get it over with." They walked around the property, Harris taking notes. When they reached the sunflower wall, she paused. Sunlight poured through the petals, turning them into stained glass. Bees hummed around them, the whole space glowing warm and alive. "These are impressive," Harris said quietly. "You grew all these?" "Everyone," Mike replied. "Planted them. After the HOA tried to force me to tear down my fence," Harris ran her fingers across a sunflower leaf. "The report said you built an aggressive barrier meant to intimidate neighbors." Mike laughed. "It's flowers. If they're intimidated by flowers, that's on them." Harris smirked. "I agree." She closed her notebook softly. "I'll file my report this afternoon, and I'll say clearly that your property is compliant and poses no threat. This should stop any county-level action." Mike let out a long breath. "Thank you, really. But," Harris added, her tone shifting, "be aware that HOA disputes can escalate when board members act emotionally rather than procedurally. And given your situation," she hesitated, "you may want to document everything, just in case." She drove off, leaving Mike in a swirl of gratitude and dread. He stepped back inside, where Emily waited anxiously. "Well," she asked. "County says we're fine," he replied. "But she warned me Brenda must have filed the report before being taken in." Emily rubbed her forehead. "Then what now? Are we safe?" Mike shrugged. "For now, but if Brenda gets released, she'll come straight here," Emily finished. "I know." For days passed, quietly, too quietly. The HOA board sent out no emails, no warnings, no fines. The neighborhood felt frozen, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see if the queen was coming back to reclaim her throne. Then on the fifth morning, something strange happened. People began walking out of their houses, gathering along the sidewalks. Murmurs filled the air. Mike stepped outside, confused. Then he saw her Brenda, stepping out of a county wellness transport van, moving slowly, her hair uncombed, her posture stiff. No clipboard, no phone, no heels. Just a paper folder clutched weakly in her hand. The van drove off, leaving her standing alone. She didn't look angry. She looked empty. Neighbors watched silently. No one approached, not even her closest allies. It was like the entire neighborhood collectively decided to keep a 10-foot distance. Brenda finally lifted her eyes and saw Mike standing across the street. She walked toward him. Emily rushed to the porch. Gripping the railing, Mike felt he nodded subtly and stepped off the porch to meet Brenda halfway. She stopped 3 feet from him. Her voice trembled. "I didn't mean for everything to go that far." Mike didn't respond. Brenda continued. "They kept asking me why I was so fixated on your property. Why I couldn't stop thinking about the fence, the paint, the mailbox." She shook her head. "I didn't have an answer. I think, somewhere along the way, I lost perspective," he said gently. "None of this needed to become a war. I know." Her eyes filled with tears. "But I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I'm stepping down from the HOA for good." That shocked him more than anything. Brenda leaving the HOA was like a shark giving up the ocean. "Are you sure?" Mike asked cautiously. She nodded weakly. "They said it's best for my mental health. And maybe for the neighborhood's too." Mike looked at her, unsure what to say. Part of him wanted to be angry. Another part saw the brokenness in her eyes. Before he could respond, Brenda turned to leave. But as she walked away, she whispered something almost too soft to hear. "It wasn't about your fence, Mike. It was about losing control of everything else in my life." She continued down the sidewalk, disappearing into her house without looking back. Emily came down the porch steps slowly. "What did she say?" Mike shook his head. "She's done with the HOA. She's stepping down." Emily's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Yeah," he said, exhaling deeply. "I think it's over." But it wasn't. Not completely. 2 weeks later, during the first HOA meeting since Brenda's removal, something unexpected happened. The board voted to dissolve the old enforcement policies, the very ones Brenda weaponized. They replaced them with new guidelines focused on cooperation, communication, and fairness. And to everyone's surprise, they asked Mike if he would consider joining the board. Emily nearly choked on her iced tea when she heard, "You, the guy who fought them for months." Mike laughed. "They said they need someone with common sense. Then they picked the wrong Reynolds," she teased, smacking his arm. But the truth was, Mike thought about it seriously. If he joined, things might actually change. People wouldn't have to live under constant fear of petty fines or power-hungry inspections. So he agreed not for revenge, but for balance. The first few meetings were awkward. Everyone tiptoed around the subject of the past conflict, but Mike kept things professional, showing the community that he wasn't there to fight, but to fix. And slowly, the neighborhood changed. People planted gardens without fear of fines. Kids drew chalk art on the sidewalk without someone snapping pictures as evidence. Neighbors fought less, talked more. The air felt lighter. One afternoon, as Mike tended the sunflowers, he noticed Brenda standing at her window watching him. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just watching. He raised a hand politely. She didn't wave back, but she didn't turn away either. Maybe someday she would. Healing takes time. Mike looked across the yard at his towering sunflower wall. The barrier that once symbolized defiance now glowed like a landmark of peace. The bees buzzed, petals swayed, and sunlight shimmered off each golden face. He whispered to himself, All this started with a mailbox. Emily stepped behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Crazy how things turn out, she said softly. Yeah, he replied, but maybe things finally make sense. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned amber, Mike realized something important. Not every battle ends in victory or defeat. Some end in transformation, some end in understanding, and some end in growth. Just like those 10-foot sunflowers rising from the soil of a once toxic neighborhood. And in that moment, he knew the truth. The war was over. The peace was real, and the sunflowers would keep blooming long after the conflict had faded into memory.